Anne Frank was a young Jewish girl who had a substantial impact on the world we know today through her daily diary entries, in her time hiding from the Nazis in a annex. But this impact was one she never got to see, unfortunately, but one she dreamed of having. So, to provide kind of a baseline for how what forced Anne Frank into hiding and the life of a Jewish person during Nazi Germany, was when the Nazis came into power in 1933. Germany had seen a lot of high unemployment rates, and many people were poor. And so this individual, Adolf Hitler, gained support by promising to solve Germans' problems. Um, and to solve the problems, he projected this hatred onto the Jews and blamed them for their problems. So, Anne Frank, her full name, and I apologize ahead of time for pronunciation for the names that follow throughout this presentation, but Anne Frank's full name was Anneliese Marie Frank, and she was born June 12th, 1929 in Frankfurt, Germany. She died March of 1945 in Bergen-Belsen, which was a concentration camp near Hanover. Was a Jewish girl who, like I said earlier, was famously known for keeping a diary for 2 years while hiding in an attic during the German occupation of the Netherlands. This diary is a classic war literature. It's read all over the world, and I read this book when I was in the 8th grade. So it's a book that, especially in the United States, a lot of kids read in middle school. Anne was born to Otto and Edith Frank. Otto Frank was a German businessman, and Edith was a stay-at-home mom who took care of Anne and her older sister, Margot. Margot was 3 years older than Anne, and Margot and her sister were complete opposites. Margot was known to be quieter and more reserved and shy, and Anne was the complete opposite. She was outgoing and very spirited. Many say that Anne took after her father. Her father loved to tell stories, and we see Anne taking that aspect, and we see that through her diaries. And Margot took after more of her mother in the quiet, reserved aspects. So at the beginning of the Nazi regime, Otto Frank moved his family from Frankfurt to Amsterdam because of the threat that the Jews faced during that time. And in 1941, German forces began to occupy the Netherlands, which was where the Franks had moved to. So this occupation forced Anne to transfer from a public school to a Jewish one because of the backlash that came with being a Jew. On her 13th birthday, Anne received a red and white plaid diary, which is pictured in the back. And the first thing she wrote in it was, quote, "I hope I will be able to confide everything to you, as I have never been able to confide in anyone, and I hope you will be a great source of comfort and support." Life as a Jew in Germany was very harsh. Jews had to register with the Germans, and they weren't allowed to own businesses, have jobs, go to movies, sit on park benches. They faced a lot of discrimination in that aspect. Anne and the other Jews were required to wear yellow stars that indicated their faith. So on the left is the stars, and these stars were intended to mock the Jews, as the inscription is basically mocking Hebraic letters, but it was a means of identification, and it was for Nazi soldiers to easily round up and capture Jews to take them to concentration camps. So the Franks were originally forced into hiding when Margot was faced with deportation to a forced labor camp, a concentration camp. And so on July 6, 1942, the Franks hid in the back room office and warehouse of Otto Frank's food products business. They were helped into hiding by a few non-Jewish friends who smuggled food and other supplies to them while they were in hiding. Some of those individuals included Miep and Han Hees, Johann Voskol and his daughter Bep, and then Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman. Originally, the Franks were the only ones in the warehouse, and that was like that for a little bit of time. And then 4 other Jews joined who needed hiding, which were Herman and Augusta Van Pels and their son Peter, as well as Fritz Pfeiffer. However, like I said, they didn't join until later. So their hiding place was coined the name the Secret Annex, and it was hidden in the back of the warehouse by a bookcase, and I have pictures that'll show that later. But the door led to a 2-floor annex. The first floor had a bathroom and a small kitchen, while the second floor had 2 rooms. At first, there was one for Anne and Margot to share, and the others were for Otto and Edith. But when the Van Pels and Fritz Pfeiffer moved in, the Van Pels ended up taking their own room, and then Margot moved in with her parents, and then Anne shared with Fritz Pfeiffer. So because they were hiding away in an operating business building, they had to cover the windows with thick curtains and had to be extra quiet during the day when people were there working, because if they were to make any excessive noise, they would have exposed themselves. And so, however, when the workers went home, they didn't need to be as cautious with volume. However, threats still were at bay, and so they needed to be very cognizant of how much noise they were making, even when there wasn't really anyone in the warehouse. This is a picture. Anne loved to collect like postcards and posters of movie stars, and you can see that on the walls. This is a picture to the entrance of the annex. There was the bookcase that hid them from discovery. And then this next picture is just the main portion of the annex. While in hiding, Anne used her diary as an outlet. She would faithfully write in her diary where she told of her day-to-day life experiences, whether that be about daily annoyances with Peter or Margot, to the fear of capture. Anne addressed her diary as Kitty, and every journal entry she would say, "Dear Kitty," and this was actually in dedication to her friend whom she had been separated with when she had been taken into hiding. Her last journal entry was written on August 1st, 1944. Just 3 days later, the annex was discovered by the Gestapo, who were acting on a tip from Dutch informers. So, on August 4th, 1944, the Germans stormed into the Franks' hideout, and everyone was taken captive and sent to concentration camps, and the men and women were separated. So the Franks were first transported to Westerbork, which was a transit camp in the Netherlands. And then they were, on September 3rd, 1944, the Franks were then transferred to Auschwitz, which was in German-occupied Poland, which is on the map on the right. And then a month later, Anne and her sister Margot were transferred to Bergen-Belsen, which was a concentration camp. And Edith Frank died in January, just before the evacuation of Auschwitz on January 18th, 1945. So she had passed just prior to the release of Jews from that concentration camp. There's 2 accounts to how Margot and Anne had died, or when they died. So the first one is according to the Dutch government. Anne and her sister both died in a typhus epidemic in March of 1945, weeks before the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. However, recently in 2015, scholars revealed new research which included analysis and archived data and first-person accounts which indicate the sisters might have died in February 1945. Either way, they both passed prior to the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. The only survivor out of the 8 in the annex was Otto Frank, and he survived Auschwitz. When he was found, he was actually in the hospital at Auschwitz when it was liberated by Soviet troops on January 27th, 1945. After the family was discovered, their friends who had been loyal, the ones loyal to them, had searched their hiding place. And so when Otto Frank returned, the friends who had searched, which were Miep and Bep, gave him the papers left by the Gestapo, and among them was Anne's diary. They kept Anne's diary just in case she came back, and unfortunately, she never did. But to honor her memory, her father published her diary in dedication to Anne, but also to her dreams and aspirations to become a journalist and writer. And so Anne's diary has now been translated into more than 65 languages and is the most widely read diary of the Holocaust. It has been made into a play, often performed at the high school level too, and that play has won Tony Awards and a Pulitzer Award. And today, the Secret Annex is now a museum and you can visit it.